the ability to replicate my voice with different words and the ability to replicate my digital presence, my visual digital presence to speak those words is possible today. It's just a matter of horsepower and the types of algorithms they're using. And so that now goes to this problem, which is, how do I know what I'm looking at is not synthetic? How do we get to this representation of these words coming out of this synthetic version of someone's presence, right? And obviously that's a very significant concern, right, from a destabilization of democracies and other very bad uses of outcomes potentially. So then the question becomes, how did you get here from the perspective of the inputs and the models and the presentation of those? And that's effectively provenance. We talked a little bit about provenance earlier as well. And what that means is you want to understand how this digital experience was created that I'm looking at. What were the tools? What were the transformations? What were the inputs? Were those actually Yorke's words from some valid source? Was the image that was created of Yorke, whether it's still or moving, what is the origin of that particular image that gives it validity, right, as an actual human image taken with film or with a camera, and not a synthetic outcome? So both of those things are, you have to essentially go back to the source of the data, look at how the data is being transformed, have proofs associated with the source, have proofs associated with the transformation that shows that the transformation was valid and okay. And this involves, zero knowledge proofs, signatures, all along this chain of custody associated with how this digital experience of a person was created.
So it seems to me that with the election cycle about to heat up again, this idea of deep fakes in politics is, really important. I heard an anecdote, interestingly. It was a friend of mine in the tech space that was talking about C2PA. Is that it, Yorke?
C2PA,
So
yeah.
If I'm getting this right, it allows for the creator technology, like a camera, to have a signature on the original content to show that it's real, that it's authentic.
That's right.
And that politicians, because of deep fakes, may consider now literally going into the marketplace, having conversations and literally recording everything that they're saying to show the time and the date that they said it, and then using this type of signature to authenticate what they said so they could push back on deep fakes. Have you heard anything about this yet?
Yeah. So C2PA is actually an organization that was co-founded by some camera companies and some tech companies. And so I think Adobe is part of it, Microsoft's part of it, Sony, Nikon, a couple other camera manufacturers. And the idea, exactly as you described it, is we want to ensure that we know the origin of content in a film, like whether it's video or moving, still or video context, right? And so the C2PA actually describes essentially a signing mechanism on that content, which packages the original content plus a bunch of metadata directly from the camera that's not manipulable, with the caveat of what I said earlier, which is, right, as soon as hardware is out in the wild, hardware is an attack surface, right? But inside, the concept here is that hardware can hold a signature, can hold a secure enclave, can sign with the key that's in the secure enclave that allows you to create an envelope, a package, which says, this is the original photo. And this photo was taken with this other associated metadata, the things that you would typically see from a camera, plus things like GPS, right? Time and location, which helps you establish the origin provenance of that particular piece of film. Now, what happens to film, as you're probably aware, is if you take an original 12 megabyte photo, that's not what gets published on a website. It's not much, right? It gets transformed before it's published on a website.
It's going to be edited for newspaper publication, digitally, et cetera, right? So does it lose that signature then? once it's modified?
It gets an additional signature. So that's why Adobe is involved, right? So Adobe has Photoshop and other tooling, which does digital transformations of media content, right? And so in the context of something like Adobe, modifying, whether it's cropping or doing something else, maybe enhancing the colors, right, associated with a particular picture, that transformation, cropping or modifying the colors, is then a validated transformation. The software would actually sign it with the software's key and say, this is a valid transformation. Here's the inputs before the transformation. Here's the transformation algorithm that we used, and here's the outputs after the transformation. So now it becomes a validated, signed transformation by this piece of software. So that becomes part of the provenance associated with this piece of digital media. If you think about that, wind that all the way forward to the concept of a deep fake. If it's completely synthetic, you won't have that original signature on the content, right? You won't have the validated transformations of that content into the final product. And so provenance of things that are synthetic, that are generated by AI is extremely important, right? And that is, again, going back to what's the value case of having a scaled up applied engineering substrate like Web3, those concepts are very well understood in the context of Web3. How do we have validation of media by consumers without the necessity to have a federated authority that is you log into to go find it, right? And if you sort of wind that back to the early days of the web and e-commerce, these types of trust certificates, which in our scenario here would roll up essentially all of the various proofs associated with those transformations into the final product, that trust certificate would be something, say, maybe you would see it on the screen here and be able to click on a little eye in the corner, which very much like a website or an e-commerce site would give you, here's the trail of trust associated with the provenance of this data, which shows you where it comes from. In the context of political campaigns, what you typically see on the bottom of a political ad is this ad is authorized by.
Yep.
Right. So that could be an additional signature on the content, which if you say click on, in a digital context, you click on this little eye and you get the trail, part of that signature would be that it's a valid piece of content authorized by to political figure.